Hello and welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast, Jim Squire. I'm a licensed psychotherapist here in Toronto, Canada, and this is actually the second episode of my podcast, and I'm excited that you're here with me. Just to give a bit of an overview of the podcast, I do envision it covering a lot of different topics in holistic health. I do feel strongly that to have truly good health, we have to address each of those areas, mind, body, and spirit. And to that end, I'm going to have a number of guests on that have some expertise in those areas that I do not. I primarily work in mental health. And actually, the next episode, I'm really excited to have Edelman on. He's an IFBB pro from London, England. I've had the pleasure of knowing for the past few months. He has some great ideas about morning rituals, shifting mindsets, even just the process of change. Of course, he knows quite a bit about how to make physical changes with your body. But we're going to be talking about all of that, and I'm really excited that he's going to be able to take time out of his busy schedule to be with me. So in terms of change, I think I'd start off with a dictionary definition of change: the act or instance of making or becoming different. Interesting. Perhaps the most common question I get when people find out I'm a psychotherapist is, can people change? And I have a funny way of responding. I usually say, well, absolutely. I'm in the change business. But I think it's also important to understand that there are certain aspects of us, such as our personality, which are typically what we would call consistent over lifespan. They don't change. I myself was an introvert. I will always be an introvert. That's not going to change. But certainly we can change behaviors with focus and intention. And I'm going to talk a bit more about how we do that. So one of the things that's really important to understand is there are many parts of the brain that have different functions and different priorities, and those are often competing with each other. So one of the things, probably the main job the brain has, is to keep us alive or keep us safe. So in doing that, the brain will seek what's familiar and will avoid the unknown, which can be, of course, scary or have all sorts of potential problems or dangers. The problem with that is it often conflicts with our desire for something better. So it's important that we understand why we stay with the familiar, even though it is causing issues in our life. Now, the survival instincts will seek safety, but our higher self typically wants variety, success, and various rewards, which will involve risk, or may involve risk. If we allow ourselves to just seek safety and familiarity, we'll have a very boring, uneventful, and likely unsatisfying life. So it's important to understand that you have to be intentional when you're going to change. If you just allow yourself to kind of exist, your brain will just seek the familiar, the comfortable, that you've sort of maintained through, the last few months, few years. You have to really focus on change, focus on what you want, be intentional, I believe, each day to be successful. Now, along with change, as I mentioned, habits. Habits are a really key element of understanding how to change. These ingrained habits are often very difficult to change, and sometimes we don't even realize to a degree how ingrained they are. One of the, just to kind of switch gears a bit, I wanted to share a quote from William James, he was a sort of a grandfather of modern psychology. He did a lot of work in the late 19th century. And he has a quote here. It's kind of a whimsical quote. It's not meant to be taken completely seriously, but I do think there's a lot of truth to it. And the quote is, 99 hundredths or possibly 999 thousandths of our activity is purely automatic and habitual, from our rising in the morning to our lying down each night. And I think, a lot of that, most of that is quite true. And if we really look deeply at ourselves, we'll realize that we are, as the saying goes, creatures of habit. So one of the things that's important to understand about habits, and this is something that we, in the last 15, 20 years or so, we've found out, and there's more and more research being done all the time, is that ingrained habits have specific cues and rewards. So the cues sort of trigger the habit, the rewards are there to kind of sustain the habits, in a sense. If there was no reward, you wouldn't likely continue the habit. And the thing we found out with a lot of this research as well, and most people are aware of this now, but I want to make sure it's clearly stated, that our brain will rewire to a new neural pathway, a new behavior, new habit, if we are practicing this new habit or behavior each day for about 45 to 60 days. Now, from my understanding, the research is pretty clear that we have to sort of actively do this new behavior each day. It's not something you can do like a few times a week. It has to be done each day for it actually to become an ingrained habit. So we can take not bad, but unhealthy or unwanted habits and change them into more adaptive, healthy, habits with this focus and intention. So, for example, we sit in front of the television and then we sort of turn on Netflix and we crave some snacks. This is there's a cue associated with this. We've also made associations between sitting down, watching it, and eating, which is all sort of something that triggers us. Next thing you know, we're getting up and we're eating those snacks and wondering why this is happening continually. So I had a client one time, and I'll tell this, it's a quick little story. I had a client one time that had come to see us about an alcohol problem. And I think he stayed for a few weeks, and then he was released. And he was starting to go to work again. He worked a week, did well, he was still sober. At the end of the week, he went to the bank he typically goes to. And in the past, his pattern had been to go and cash his check and then go to the liquor store right next door. So, as you can probably guess, he went to the he went to the bank, cashed his check, and then walked right next door to the liquor store, basically on autopilot, and then contacted us a few days later, upset that he'd relapsed and confused how it happened. And at that point, he really wasn't even sure what happened, because he didn't intend to drink. He had he didn't feel he made a conscious choice to drink. And that's where this, as some people would describe it, almost autopilot would happen with these automatic habits. So what we suggested to this client, which was quite successful, was for him to simply find another bank that didn't have a liquor store next door. He did that and was, to my knowledge, was successful. But going through that process, he wasn't aware, and we weren't aware initially that would happen. So it's really important to understand the cues, the rituals, and the rewards that are part of these habit processes. And the other thing I should talk a bit more in detail, I guess, is what we call neuroplasticity. What that is a term we use to describe the basically how the brain changes. So around 20 years ago, we typically thought the brain was fairly fixed. Once you became an adult, your brain wouldn't change much, and once you were fully developed. We were quite wrong. We didn't understand, as I just explained a few minutes ago, that with sustained focus, you can change. You can rewire your brain, find new neural pathways, ideally ones that are more adaptive, ones that are more positive, and we sort of see this all the time. But it's just important to understand that it's not something that's just going to happen if you casually engage in a new habit now and again. There has to be a focus and intention, in my view, daily. And I think the research also supports that too. There has to be a focus on this each day. So something else I wanted to talk about too, this is something that we look at in terms of, the change process. I thought it might be helpful to just give an overview of this because so many people have loved ones, friends, people they know who they can't understand why they won't change. They clearly see behaviors that are not serving them well and don't understand why they don't change it. So I won't go into sort of where this comes from. It's kind of complicated. I don't think it's important, but basically there's these stages in change. And the first one is pre-contemplation. A person in pre-contemplation has not considered change, is not in a place of change. The next stage would be contemplation, and then action, and then maintenance. So the reason this is important is if you're sort of trying to get someone in the pre-contemplation stage to change, you're likely just going to encounter resistance. They haven't considered it, they're not ready, you push them, and you'll just get resistance. Now, one of the things that we typically find is people will coerce people or give them ultimatums to change. And so then you may see some change, but typically what research shows, the less the person is motivated to the change, if they're doing it for someone else, typically the motivation for that change fades to almost nothing within the first 30 days. And we've seen that sort of through research done on interventions with people where they would agree through being coerced to make a change. And then after 30 days, they had almost no motivation for this change. So it's important that people come to change and they're ready to change for their own reasons, for it to be sustainable. And most people kind of know this. You hear this all the time, and people saying, the person has to want to change, which is true. So contemplation is the next stage, and that's a stage where somebody has considered change, but they haven't actually started it. So if you encounter them at that point with some suggestions and encouragement, that sort of thing, support maybe, you might be able to get them to change because they are contemplating it. They are wondering, hey, maybe I should change this behavior. Now the action stage is pretty, explanatory. People are actually changing, and the maintenance just sustaining that change. So I find that model of change quite helpful as a person working with people to really make sure that you're meeting the person where they're at, which is sort of a social work term we use. You're not meeting them at a point farther ahead, which in most cases you just get resistance. So it's important to understand too that when the brain rewires, one of the things that research has shown that really cements that wiring of the new habit, behavior, of the new neural pathway is we need to focus on the change as it's happening, be aware of it, acknowledge it, and feel gratitude about that change. And so what that would basically mean is I have a good week where I've done the things that I've set out to do. I focus on the success I've had. I feel some gratitude over being successful, over getting up when I didn't feel like it, etc. By doing that, you really do sort of cement the change and reinforce that it's positive for your to your brain, in a sense. So that's something that gratitude is a wonderful tool for so many things. But adding gratitude and just ramping up the gratitude will make a huge difference in obtaining that positive mindset and change. Now, there are some other challenges that come up, and I thought it was important to mention, is some people just feel really stuck and they don't know what to do, and they're just having so much difficulty. Now, some people have really ingrained beliefs that are difficult, that interfere with change. One, feeling worthy of change is one of them. And certainly if you're finding yourself just spinning your wheels, not having success, there's a lot of professionals out there that can help you, therapists, coaches, psychologists, etc. If you're able to, seek them out, perhaps get a book. There's a number of them that Atomic Habits is one that's quite popular right now. I forget the name of the author, but there are a lot of books in the self-help section on change. In fact, there's probably dozens. So the other things that come up, I thought it would be important to mention as well, that we will often see is, and one of them that, it's a term most people are familiar with, but they don't necessarily know what it's about, and that's denial. So denial is kind of a safety mechanism that your brain has to protect it from being overwhelmed. What that means is if I've got a certain kind of behavior that my brain is kind of like in denial about, because to actually acknowledge that behavior, say I have a terrible addiction or something like that, would be overwhelming, would maybe break me in some way by just kind of admitting and accepting this situation. So denial at times is sort of a common thing the brain does. There's certainly ways to help people in denial, but it's important to understand why it's there. People would have to come slowly to the idea of change rather than being confronted with it. Rationalizing is something that we do all the time to keep us where we're at. We say, we can't afford to change, don't have time, we're too busy, I tried in the past, it doesn't work. All of these things, in some cases they may be true, but typically they're just ways to keep us where we're at. The one thing I've noticed with people through working with people for so long is that if you're living and just offering these rationalizations all the time and not changing, you're typically not going to be happy. You're going to be upset with yourself, resentful. So being honest with yourself, having people in your life that be honest with you, very helpful to kind of. And as I said, if you go and approach change, as I said earlier, from the perspective of just doing a very small incremental change. You don't have to go to the gym 5 days a week, even if you have to start with 1 day a week. I mean, I guess I should use a bit different activity, given that our gyms are currently closed because of the lockdown, but I think you understand what I mean. That start very small, be consistent, you will get there. I will guarantee that. Just be consistent. And there was another quote here that I wanted to share that I think sort of sums up a lot of this. And life is what you make it. The choice is in your hands. And there's another quote I'm very fond of. And that's, why not live a life you're proud to live? And typically what I hear from people is that they're usually very happy if they attempt things. They're usually very happy if they try. And they usually don't have regrets if they at least try. A lot of people don't try and are often have a lot of regrets for that. So I typically find people who try and aren't successful are much happier. So give it a try. Try to make small changes. Try to be consistent. As I mentioned in the first episode that I went into more, try to be compassionate with yourself, kind to yourself, encourage yourself. Understand change is difficult. Change takes time. But, you will get there if you are focused and intentional. Now, typically people, if you have a support person or accountability partner, or somebody that you can share with that can encourage you, it'll make a huge difference. I've witnessed change by so many people, and one of the things I find so enjoyable about my work, and I'm truly honored to share in the journey with these people, and I think it's probably the greatest reward I get as a therapist, is seeing people change, seeing people who thought change wasn't possible actually, make big changes and enjoy the benefits of that. I mean, it's I really truly feel honored to be able to share this journey with so many people. And that comes to basically what I wanted to address with change in the limited time that I have. I wanted to mention again that, as I said in the beginning, next episode I'm going to have Ash Edelman on IFBB Pro. He's going to talk a little bit about beliefs, mindset, and whatever else that he wants to share with you about how he got to be successful. He's been a person that's inspired me, and I've been very impressed by him. I'm sure you will be too. I also have a psychotherapist coming up, and the episode after that, I believe he'll be coming up after that. His name is Carl, and he's got a psychotherapy practice in Ajax, and he's got some really interesting things about mindfulness he's going to share. I find him really interesting and engaging, and I'm sure you will too. I haven't sort of nailed down exactly when we're going to, but I believe it's going to be after the next, in perhaps a month. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to have some more guests lined up, and to cover some different areas, and so stick around, and I hope you'll continue to tune in, and stay safe and be well.